We now come to the final stage of the T160 engine rebuild. With the chain alignment out of the way, it's time to refit the oil pump, which was fitted earlier, but was removed to facilitate easier fitting of the inner primary chain case. A gasket has already been placed at the bottom of the oil pump cavity, and now two thin O-rings are inserted into their grooves to seal against the body of the pump. The oil pump gear was fitted previously, and I used Loctite thread locker on the nut as a precaution, and then bent the tab washer over for added safety. Locate the pump onto the hollow dowel at the bottom of the cavity. Inserting one of the screws partway into its hole allows you to use the drive gear to rotate the pump if required. Note that one of the holes in the drive gear is drilled off-centre to facilitate insertion and tightening of two of the four screws. There is one longer screw which fits the top left-hand hole, which has the locating dowel. These screws have a fine thread into relatively soft alloy, so take care not to strip a thread. The oil pump drive idler gear is now fitted into place. Next, the gear change crossover shaft is inserted. I blue tacked a 6-inch ruler to the gears to give me a rough guide for the bottom edge of the gear change quadrant. With the quadrant already loosely fitted to the crossover shaft, it's inserted through the cases to engage with the splined link in the gearbox outer cover. There is a steel sleeve that must be inserted behind the link. This link needs to engage with the gear change fork as the crossover shaft is inserted. Select the correct spline to position the quadrant as shown in the drawing. The curved lower edge of the quadrant should pass over the centre of the lower bolt. Once in the correct position, fit the washer and nut. Tighten to secure the link. The outer cover can then be fitted and the 3 screws inserted and tightened. The quadrant is then removed to allow the locating sleeve to be fitted. In our triplex conversion kit, we provide a slightly longer spacer and bush so the gear change quadrant does not contact the push drive sprocket. The locating plate is fitted, bolts are inserted and tightened, and the tab washers are bent over. Slide the spacer tube into place, but don't fit the quadrant. It's now time to fit the chain and sprockets. Something we've decided is a good practice in order to avoid oil finding its way along the clutch splines and out across the end plate into the clutch chamber is to fit an O-ring onto the neck of the clutch shaft below the spline. The part number of an O-ring we find is a perfect fit is 60-4419. This is the same O-ring used to seal oil from the crossover shaft tunnel between the engine cases on a T160. When the push drive is pushed into place, the O-ring compresses slightly to make a perfect seal, stopping any oil that has travelled down the spline from escaping past the mating surfaces. The push drive and engine sprocket with primary chain attached are now fitted to their respective shafts. Make sure you align the markings made in the previous step that will give the least clutch run out. Refit the gear change quadrant and secure with washer and nut. Washers are fitted and an oil seal protector is slid onto the clutch pull rod. The clutch nut has an oil seal to stop oil from the primary case finding its way along the pull rod and into the clutch, like it did in this example. The lip of the seal should be facing you when fitted. After fitting the nut, the sleeve can be removed. Fifth gear is selected by manipulating the gearbox input shaft and the gear lever shaft with the aid of a couple of suitable spanners. A length of chain attached to a steel handle had already been fed in and around the gearbox output sprocket, so now the push drive and crankshaft nuts can be tensioned up. Tension the push drive nut to 75 foot-pounds and the engine sprocket nut to 60 foot-pounds. Sealant has been applied to the primary cover gasket and faces. The thrust bearing is lubricated, and with the chain tensioner blade in place, the primary cover is now fitted roughly into place and screws are inserted to locate it. The gear lever shaft quadrant should be visible through the hole in the primary cover as illustrated in this drawing. A bit of a wiggle and the gear shaft quadrant teeth align, allowing the cover to slip into place. Screws are then tightened up. The inner thrust plate is now fitted. The ramps have been greased so the lifting balls will stay in place during assembly. A new bearing has been fitted to the outer thrust plate, which is now fitted, and the clutch adjustment nut is then screwed onto the pull rod and the slack is taken up. The lock nut is fitted, followed by the thrust plate return springs. Bolts are tightened and tab washers are bent over. Clutch free play is checked and the lock nut is then tightened up. The large nut should rotate freely but with as little clearance as possible. Any excess slack here reduces the available clutch lift, but if there is no slack, the push drive thrust bearing will be under constant load, causing premature wear. So this is a critical setting. Once the clutch is set correctly, the outer inspection cover can be fitted and the screws nipped up. The screw which is located just above the gear lever shaft is longer than the rest. The screw below the gear lever shaft is a cheesehead screw, but the same length as the rest. I've not used any gasket sealant as this cover will need to come off again so the clutch cable can be fitted after the engine is fitted to the bike. Check the primary chain tension. I've fitted a brand new XXX chain, so I had the choice of either changing over to a T150 chain tensioner blade or modifying the T160 one. I chose the latter. Here you can see a standard T160 slipper on top and a modified one at the bottom. 350 cc's of engine oil is added. Yes, the drain plug was fitted previously, and the inspection cap is screwed into place with a new O-ring. The breather cover is now screwed into place, and apart from the tacho drive and starter motor, which will be fitted after the engine goes into the bike, this motor is now probably better than new and ready for thousands of miles of trouble-free riding.